Are you a victim of identity theft? The disciples were. And Jesus and the disciples have been together for a few months now. And they had seen and done miracle after miracle, healing after healing. They were different. They were changed. They were confident. But Jesus wanted to alert them to the fact that their spiritual identity was in the process of being stolen. It always is. And today we do part one of a two-part teaching on identity theft. Disaster averted. Now, not long ago, I got a call from my credit card company. And they asked me if I had just charged $450 at a truck stop in Arkansas. And I said, no, I'm currently in Colorado Springs and hadn't been in Arkansas for 30 years. And she said, that's what I thought. Our fraud protection team was alerted by this unusual out-of-state purchase, so we made the call. And she said, you won't be charged for that transaction either. I said, good. You know, someone had stolen my credit card number, which was stealing a piece of my identity. And it made me feel vulnerable in an invisible kind of way. I never saw the thieves. I had no idea I was being robbed. And had it not been for the experts at my credit card company, I would never have known my identity was in the process of being stolen until it was too late and the damage had already been done. See, the same is true spiritually. See, identity theft is always a crime. Spiritual identity theft is an art form that interrupts our calling. You know, today we're going to look at a record in Matthew 16, you can go ahead and turn there, that tells us how Jesus alerted his apostles, his disciples, his followers to the devastation of identity theft spiritually. Matthew chapter 16. And we're going to start this in 13. And just so you get the timing, this is about halfway into the ministry of Jesus' earthly ministry. It's about the halfway point. So here we are, verse 13. When Jesus came into the coasts of Caesarea Philippi. The coast of Caesarea Philippi, there's two cities named Caesarea in Israel. And one is on the Mediterranean Sea coast. And the other is 30 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, near the headwaters of the Jordan River. And it's on the far northern border of Israel, right next to Syria. And this is Caesarea Philippi. And when it says coast, all that means is the borders, like the border of your county or border of your state. And the word Caesarea is in honor of the Roman emperor called Caesar. Caesar. Caesarea. It's like Caesarea. And so that's all Caesarea means. It's in honor of like we have the president who is our country's leader. Well, they had the Caesar as their leader of Rome. Hence the term Caesarea. And Caesarea Philippi honors both Caesar and Philip, who was the ruler of that area of Israel at that time. So that's where the name came from. Just like I was born in Houston, Texas, which honors who? Sam Houston. Of course. Put your hand over your heart there. And like Washington, D.C. is named after... Okay, there you go. You get the point. So this area of Caesarea Philippi had lush waterfalls that irrigated malaria-infested marshlands that fed a large lake named Hula, which emptied into the Jordan River, which flows south to Galilee, to the Sea of Galilee, and then Galilee empties and flows down the Jordan River to the Dead Sea. And it sort of ends there. And this town of Caesarea Philippi was a crossroads. It was a cultural and a trade crossroads. And it connected the Mediterranean Sea all the way into Syria, and then all the way north from Syria all the way down into Israel, down to Egypt. So it was a huge trade route. It was a great crossroads. It connected the east to the west and the north to the south. And that's where Jesus had his group at this time. This is 30 miles north of Galilee, where so much happened in the Gospels. It was also named, Caesarea Philippi was also named Panias. That was also another name for that city. Just look it up on an atlas. And it was named after the Greek god Pan, not to be confused with Peter Pan, but maybe did some of the same things deviously. And even in Jesus' day, this area hosted a lavish, gleaming white marble temple to worship Pan, the goat-footed god of victory in battle, the pagan god who caused panic in the enemy, the god responsible for the limitations associated with sexual or spiritual possession. And I got that from a book called The Cult of Pan in Ancient Greece. And the first century historian Josephus wrote of this temple and its beauty many, many times. I noticed at least 10 or 12 times in different of his writings. It must have been impressive. And Panias, or Caesarea Philippi, was flat out breathtaking. Had waterfalls, had water, had great crops. It was a gorgeous place. Not to mention being a cultural crossroads. And this is where the doors opened for Jesus to teach his followers a lesson that they wouldn't soon forget. He taught them about spiritual identity theft. And this record takes place, like I said, about halfway through Jesus' ministry. He'd been with these apostles. They'd done all kinds of things together. We've studied about those over and over again. And this is 1 week, about 1 week before Jesus allowed Peter, James, and John to go with him into a mountain that in the record called the Mount of Transfiguration. So this is this is the turning point. This is a pivotal point. This is a pinnacle point in his ministry. And he's about to ask 2 questions. And one will show and the other's going to tell. So question 1, who do they say that I am? Verse 13, when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Now, have you ever asked somebody what they really think about you? Well, sometimes you hear things you don't want to hear. I mean, sometimes people will tell you what they really think, right or wrong. Josephine always says, don't put a bullet in the gun that somebody's going to shoot you with. Be careful what you say. But Jesus, now, in a second here, you'll see more. With this question, we see into the mind of the Christ, into the mind of Jesus. And with the second question, which we're going to see in verse 15, we see into the minds of the disciples. Now, parallel record of this is in Luke 9:18, and what it adds, but at that moment, it talks about Jesus was praying alone, but he was in the company of his disciples. So you got to get the mind picture. He's sitting there. Maybe he's near that temple. It's off to the side. Okay, he might be off under some trees. You can hear the water gushing and rushing and flowing, and the stream moving, and the birds chirping, and the crickets cricketing, and then and so they're sitting there and they're talking about. He asked him this question: who do they say that I am? Now remember, if he was sitting there praying, what do you think all his followers would have done? They probably were sitting there quietly in prayer as well. And now we don't know if it was just the 12 you'll find out there was more people there. I don't know exactly who he was talking to here, but it was at least the 12. It could have been a multitude. Don't know. And so this topic of who am I and what do other people think of me was in the mind of Jesus when he was praying. Have you ever thought about what people thought about you? Sure. All but one of you. I'm just kidding. This is looking into the mind of Christ. See, most people wonder who they are. Jesus knew who he was, but he wanted to know what other people thought. So in any case, Jesus looks up, he breaks his silence, stops praying, and he asks the first of two questions. Who do people say that I am? What is the word on the streets concerning me? Verse 14, and they, it doesn't say specifically who, and they said, some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. See, one unnamed disciple, he piped up and said, people say that you're John the Baptist. Another follower said, on the street, they're saying that you're the reincarnation of one of the prophets, maybe Elijah or Jeremiah. Now, a side note here before we go further. His cousin John the Baptist was recently, just right before this, a few days before this, savagely murdered by Herod at the request of his nasty wife and sinister stepdaughter. Not many days before this outing, Matthew 14:10. And the hurt would have still been with Jesus, not to mention Peter's brother, Andrew, who had left being the disciple of John to follow Jesus. Jesus wouldn't have been the only one hurt by that. And now somebody brings up, they think that you're John the Baptist. Come back. And it amazes me that people were already saying that Jesus was actually John so soon after he died. They were cousins. Maybe they held a family resemblance. It's possible. Did Jesus start out teaching similar to what John taught? Yes. He started off teaching the same stuff. Repent. Baptize. Get baptized. The same stuff. See, the problem is John was a man who had the Spirit of God his entire life, but he never did one single miracle. John 10:41. And you don't have to turn there. That's just where it says that. And Jesus did thousands of miracles up to that point. They had just left from feeding. Right before this record, they just fed 4,000 people with a few pieces of bread. It just happened. Do you think that if Jesus slowed himself down to the accepted pace of his cousin John, that it would be a form of identity theft? If he tried to relate with the pace and the mission of John, would it have limited the Christ?
Yes.
Absolutely. It's hard for us to understand these comments, but during that day and time, the average Joe believed in some form of reincarnation. Maybe even some of those disciples. Remember, it wasn't like pure Israel, like we think it was. It was just a cultural hodgepodge of people. You had the Romans, and before that the Greeks, and then you had the Samaritans, and all these people traveling up and down. Remember, it was a Roman province. Anybody who was a Roman citizen could travel and trade anywhere in there. Just the way it was. One of the reasons people don't like America is because we think free and we accept a lot of different cultures and thoughts. So, people still think that way I recently heard a reality TV personality named Nicole Snooki Polizzi say that she believes she was Marilyn Monroe in a past life. I think a mini Italian Jersey Shore version of Marilyn Monroe. But it's just funny, you know. People all want to, you know, they talk that way. Everyone wants to identify with someone great from the past. Never someone average or criminal. See, one's sense of identity is further warped when they believe they're channeling the spirit, the life force, or the essence of some deceased person. You limit yourself with those comparisons. That is a type of identity theft. My grandmother, who thought she knew everything, one day I was helping her move. She had me move trees around like people move furniture. I'd dig it up and move it, and then a few years later I'd dig it up and move it somewhere else, but she'd always talk to me, and I was telling her someday I'd like to live near the ocean. This is when I was 16 or 15 or something. And she looked at me like what? She goes, we never had relatives, you know, in your past, you never had relatives that lived near the ocean. You know, what she meant is like reincarnation. That's what she was referring to. You know, because you want to do something, it had to be because somebody before you. Imagine being limited by what somebody in the past did. How could you ever advance? Because you're stuck in that mold. It's crazy. But people thought this. So you got to see this to understand that the second question that's going to happen in a minute. See, if you dream of being someone else, where did you go? Even that is a form of identity theft. Sure, we can learn from someone else's courage, their curiosity, their generosity, or their ability, you know, via stories passed down, books, tapes, TV, whatever. But our tie to our spiritual identity, but to tie our spiritual identity to those people only limits our own discovery, our own self-discovery. See, be limitless. Be you. Exist. Question number 2. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Remember, they just stop praying. And then Jesus starts talking. Who do they say that I am? Well, you're some reincarnation of the prophets, maybe even your cousin. He's like, what? You know, now he knew what people thought. He's not a dope. And now he's going to go, but what about you? Who do you think that I am? And here's the biggest question. If you can answer this question, you will understand your own spiritual identity. Who do you think the Christ is? Verse 15, and he saith unto them, but whom do ye say that I am? Now watch how this follow-up question exposes the mindset of the disciples. And here then Peter jumps in and he answers that question for all of them. And watch how Jesus will he'll respond directly to Peter. Verse 16, and Simon Peter and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he was a good kid. He raised his hand, you know, and Jesus pointed to him, and he answered. And we may think, duh. You know, I mean, Jesus gets so excited about this as we keep reading. And I think, everybody knows that. You know, everybody knows that. But then I really thought about it. Actually, very few people then or today actually believe the entirety of that statement. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. See, it blessed Jesus so much that he wanted to compliment Peter. Verse 17, and Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. Now imagine how Peter would feel. Remember, this is just seconds after they've been praying. Ask one question, got a couple answers. Then Peter jumps in, answers this question, and then he goes, You're blessed. You are a blessed man, Peter. You didn't get that from your own head. But God showed you. Now, Simon Bar-Jonah was his name. It just means Simon the son of John. That's all it means. Like Erickson, Leif Erikson, the son of Eric. It's the same kind of thing. And Peter was a nickname that Jesus gave Simon the very first day they met. That's from John 1:42. And the term flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto you, but my Father which is in heaven means that Peter didn't think this up on his own. God showed it to him. Jesus said, Bravo, Peter. You figured out how to receive revelation. Good work. You think that blessed Peter? Oh, yeah. You think Jesus is making a big point here? You think this is just for Peter? No. See, Jesus said, yes, you got it, Peter. You didn't come up with that with your own head, man. You didn't do it by listening to what everybody else says about me. You didn't get it from the internet. You tapped into the very heart of God. You gained access to the power of the universe. You're a free thinker. You're awesome. You didn't allow others to steal your perception of me from you. Confused identity. Now, and this is remember 6 months in, Jesus is about to finally explain the nickname that he gave Peter a few months ago upon their first meeting. Remember Andrew, he left John. We shared this a couple of weeks ago. John the Baptist was baptizing. One of his disciples were there. Jesus came out of the wilderness one day, came back the next day. 2 of John's disciples were with him. And then John said, Behold, the Lamb of God. He's going to take away the sins of the world. And then 2 of John's disciples at that point left him and started following Jesus. Jesus turns around, what's up? They go, where do you live, man? Come and see. They're still coming to see. Well, that was Andrew, and Peter was his brother. Peter comes walking up. He drags Peter, from his fishing gear, and he brings him up to Jesus. He's walking up to Jesus, and Jesus says, Hey, Simon, we're going to call you Peter, which means a rock, a movable stone, a throwable stone. And that was it. That's all he says. And so that hung, maybe he might have wondered for 6 months, why did he name me Little Rock? Why did he name me Rocky? Why did he name me that? Doesn't necessarily mean a tiny little thing, but it's a movable stone. And so now he's going to explain this in verse 18. And I say unto thee, it's funny how God had worked in Jesus to say this 6 months before, or about 6 months before, and then now it's going to get explained even further. He said, and I say unto thee, thou art Peter, And that Peter's the nickname. It just means a movable or a throwable stone. A stone you can move. He goes, you, I nicknamed Peter. Movable. Hard, tough, but movable. But upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And of course, he's pointing at Peter in part of that, and then he's putting his thumbs back toward himself in the other part of that. Upon this rock, and that word rock means an unmovable stone. There's a difference. We've all thrown stones. You might have skipped them across a smooth lake in the evening from the dock to see how many skips you can get. You know, we've all thrown stones. But the rock can't be thrown. Can't be thrown. Can't be moved. I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. We'll get into that in a few minutes. And what this verse is actually saying is it seems, I ask myself, what is this verse actually saying? Because it seems to say that Peter was the man. Peter was the man. And that he was going to be the one Jesus relied on to continue his ministry. It also seems to say that whatever is behind those gates of hell doesn't stand a chance against the church that Peter was responsible to build or support. Now, is this actually what it means? No. See, the history of Acts disproves that theory. In fact, if you just read the rest of this record, and we'll get into the end of this, the other part of this next week, it'll disprove it as well. And the first time Jesus saw him, he called him this name. He called him a rock. And and the name stuck. Everybody started calling him Peter. We had a lady in my networking group who worked for an office supply company. And when presenting her for her 5-minute talk, somebody inadvertently slipped up and introduced her as Sweetie from Sweet Office Supply instead of Andrea from Sweet Office Supply. Well, this Andrea is super sweet. She's a beautiful lady. She's a sweetheart. And now everybody in that group calls her Sweetie. And she even calls herself Sweetie now, introduces herself that way. And the nickname really perfectly identified her, and it stuck. Well, Peter, that name, I guess if the Messiah gave you a nickname, it would stick too, right? Probably. He did it. Peter wasn't the only one that got named. A couple of them were sons of thunder and, different things. So Jesus was a cool dude. So now the identity enemy. And Jesus knew exactly what he was doing when he nicknamed Simon the Rock. And he was going to teach a lesson that sprung from prayer, began to flesh out with 2 questions, and it's going to soon reach its peak in understanding. See, most people place tradition above truth, and they confuse the identity of Jesus and of Peter because of what other people say. And it's hard to beat against religion. It's hard to stand against the populace, especially the educated populace, who don't just think they're right. They know they're right. See, here's a quote. I love acting, but I don't like all the other stuff associated with it. The interest in celebrities, the press, the internet, when your identity becomes mixed up in the way people are perceiving you. End of quote. Nicole Kidman. It can get confusing. You begin to think that you're important because people say you're important, or that you're special because people say you're special. Or you have something to say because you're from Hollywood. And we hear them talk all the time, foolish things. Let's look a bit closer at this verse. Now remember, they're gathered together near a lovely, refreshing city surrounded with lush crops, gushing waterfalls, and multicultural traders and travelers. And an immaculate marble temple takes center stage. It gleamed in the sun and in the midst of the waterfall right next to it. You know, and it took center stage. It overlooks a town dedicated to a god named Pan, who causes confusion in the enemy so they can be overcome. Now Jesus is going to help Peter overcome his identity enemy. An American author named Bryant H. McGill said, "All discomfort comes from suppressing your true identity." And I thought that was well said. And I was wondering, do you even know your true identity? We all think we do. But just think how much you're a multiple of how you were raised and the family you were from and the schools you went to and the books you read and the shows you watch and the profession you have. Is that really who we are? Is that really and truly what God called us to be? Or has it been queered? Here's another quote, and this is from Arthur Ashe. He's one of the first black tennis champions. He said, quote, "My potential is more than can be expressed within the bounds of my race or ethnic identity," end of quote. It's pretty good. Arthur said it well. Most people allow their race or their economic status to skew their true identity. I just read a couple of articles today on homegrown Americans of Middle Eastern heritage who are going back to the land of their forefathers to fight alongside American-hating terrorists. There's more than a few, folks. And some are even U.S.-trained soldiers. Talk about identity crisis? Because that's where they're from. That's why you can't be president if you're not born here. Because people always have an affinity to where they're born. They always hold an identity. Does that make sense? Yeah. Somebody came in from another country, then they could do all kinds of things. So, here's from a French sociologist and philosopher named Jean Baudrillard. Quote, "Americans may have no identity, but they do have wonderful teeth." It's funny because you think of Europeans and we think of them with lousy teeth, and Americans always have these shiny, nice teeth. Let's look again at verse 18. "And I say unto thee, thou art Peter, you're a movable rock. But upon this rock, this unmovable rock, I will build my church." See, the context of this verse here and in Acts tells us that Jesus pointed to Simon and said, you're rock hard, but you can be moved, man. I too am a rock, but bigger, and I can't be moved. He wasn't bragging. He was just saying the truth. The word "this," like that word "upon this rock," it's only used 3 times in the Gospels. And one time is here in Matthew 16, and another time is in John 2:19 when he said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Remember how people got confused with that too? And they thought he said he's going to tear down the temple? That was part of the charges brought against him. And then the third time is John 6:58 when he said, "This is the bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers did eat manna which are dead, but he that eateth of this bread shall live forever." Those are the only 3 times that he called himself this, an inanimate object, so to speak. See, because Jesus didn't allow his identity to be stolen, because he was unmovable, we too will beat death and live forever. Now that's a pretty good vision. Big, but movable. I was once working on a farm, and I was told to dig up a rock that had been sticking up 4 or 5 inches in the middle of this double track road where the farm equipment had to go past. And every time you drove over it, the wagons and the tractors would jump and shake, boom, 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 and it would throw stuff at him. It was just stuck up too far. And the farmer was tired of hitting this obstacle, so he threw a shovel to me and he told me to go dig it up. So I dutifully grabbed the shovel and walked out to this area and started digging. Now I thought it was going to be a boulder like this, about a foot or two. That's what I thought. So I started digging. Well, I dug down a foot. It just kept going, kept spreading out. I dug down 2 feet. It just got bigger. I dug down 3 feet all around this thing. And it still I never saw the curve of it. And now I have dirt everywhere. Now the road's totally impassable. Then I dig down 4 feet, and I'm in this hole, digging this stuff out, throwing dirt out, taking me most of the day. Then I dig down about 5 feet. It's almost over my head. And then I finally saw the rock begin to curve. So I dug around it, and I realized I'd found the bottom of that boulder. So then I run back to the barn. I get the biggest tractor that we had, and I grab the hardiest chain, and I drive back out to this thing. I tightly wrap that boulder up so the chain won't slip, and I get in the tractor, put it in first gear. I push the throttle, and then all it did is it just went up. The front wheel started going up in the air, and I had to back off so the wheels slapped back down to the ground because I didn't want it to tip over on me. It couldn't pull. I mean, that was the biggest thing that we had, and it wouldn't pull that rock out. So I went back. I drove back to the barn. There was another guy there. I said, get a tractor and follow me and bring a chain. So I hooked myself back up in there, hooked the chain back up. He came out. We hooked the chain up to the front of my tractor. And so his tractor was pulling my tractor. My tractor was pulling that. I said, put it in first gear and let's roll. And so we did. We gunned the throttle. The engines began to scream on both the tractors. Black smoke was billowing out of the exhaust. And then all of a sudden the thing, boom, it moved in the hole. So I thought, well, if it moves, we're going to get it now. I rewrapped the chains. We gunned it again, and the thing just popped out of there and plopped on the ground. That monolith leaned in that hole and then popped out of there. Now, I had comically imagined that rock might have been the tip of some ancient buried mountain. But with a little focused effort, I was able to move it. So it was big, but it was still movable. But it took a lot of force. Rock solid identity. See, Jesus Christ was more solid in himself than that rock that I pulled out of that hole. He was the rock. There'd never been a human alive like Jesus Christ. Everything that was thrown at him, he handled. He was totally unmovable by the things of the world. The pressures, the pleasures, the suggestions, the upbringing, the culture, the religion. I look to my right and I see Pikes Peak. Beautifully sunlit today, snow-capped, it's nice, but it's unmovable. I don't care how strong you are. I don't care how big of a tractor you have. You're not going to pull that mountain. You're not going to move it. You can move little pieces of it, but you're not going to move Pikes Peak. It's unmovable. The whole point of this is understanding and protecting our identity, not to allow ourselves to have a spiritual identity theft. Don't let anything or anyone cause you to back off on your beliefs. Well, I don't like him. So I'm not going to be a Christian anymore. It happens. People get sucked away pretty easy. They get their feelings hurt sometimes. My God, you hang out with anybody, you're going to get your feelings hurt. Your own family. Forget about it. It's going to happen. Don't let anything or anyone cause you to back up. Jesus is a rock. He's unmovable. He wasn't bragging. He was as unmovable in his identity as he was in believing for a healthy future for himself and the church. Verse 18 continued, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And the gates of hell is not saying that there's evil like snarling and snapping on the other side of these gates. It's not these big wrought iron gates and there's zombies with one eye and, looking ugly and skin all messed up, and then monsters on the other side, and people with flames on them. That's not what this is talking about. All it means is the grave. That's all it means, is death. Until Jesus, nobody had ever beat death. They might have been raised from the dead, but someday they died again, so they didn't beat death. Get it? Nobody had ever gotten raised from the dead but didn't die again a few years later. He was the first one that beat the gates of hell, so to speak. First one that death couldn't contain. And that's the greatest power of the enemy. Steal, kill, and destroy. It's death. You can't function anymore. You can't do a good deed anymore. You can't worship God anymore. You can't do anything anymore when you're dead. Contrary to what Snooki said. As wise as she must be. And he's the first one that death couldn't contain, and ultimately we will each do the same thing. That's why you could say that to him. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. This is that church that he's going to build. Now, Peter would help. But upon this rock will I build my church. He's talking about himself. And he built it, and if our life is built on Christ, then we will find our true identity. See, the gates of hell will no longer be able to hold mankind back. It's the fear of death, folks, that hold people back from doing so many things. When we get past that fear of death, then a lot of times you can begin to really serve in your true calling, or even just in your profession. Fear binds. See, nothing's going to keep his church down. Not even death is going to keep the church down, because we're all getting up someday. It's a promise. Verse 19, and I love this. I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Now just think about this. This went from prayer to 2 questions to saying this stuff to Peter, sort of filling in the blanks here, to saying what he's going to do, and he's saying even death is not going to stop what I got started here. And now he's saying I'm going to give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now, just what is that? How cool would that be? With a key, you can get into a room, right? You can unlock a box. You can go into a safety deposit box and, whoa, see your inheritance. You get that in the will or whatever. This is something here. The keys to the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever. Now, this is huge. Here, this is just an answer. If you get who I am, here's what's going to happen. Number one, you're never gonna stay dead. You're gonna beat the gates of hell. Now you're gonna get the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and in addition, You get door number 1, door number 2, and door number 3. Ding, 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 ding. You see, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. You know, I mean, the kingdom of heaven is a multi-millennial reign of Jesus Christ. You're going to understand Christ. You're going to understand the power of Christ. And if you can understand that and you can identify with Christ, can you identify with who you are in Christ? Yeah. He said, Peter, I'm giving you the keys to understanding why I'm here and who I am. You get this revelation thing, man. You're no more just tied into the 5 senses. You know, what you do has spiritual ramifications as well as spiritual power behind it. Like I've taught so many times, we each have the power of eternity behind our believing. You know, the power of the whole universe is focused right on your point of believing. The power of eternity, the power of the whole universe, the power of God. There's no way we have lack. You want healing? Then get your healing. You need a job? Then go get that job. You need more sales? Then go get those more sales. You need a different profession? Go get it. What do you need? It has to be there, folks. All the power of the universe is behind this. The keys to the kingdom of heaven are yours. Oh, well. Whatever that means, Mark. You know, who cares? People looking at their watches, you know. I mean, I get it. You know, I mean, but it's real. What's loosed on earth is unleashed in heaven. And that has to be believing. When believing is loosed on earth, let your believing loose. Open the cage, boom, and it goes out there. It starts heading for what you want. Let your believing go, folks. Control that believing. Would be another way to say it. You see, and then the whole power of the universe. You have the keys to the kingdom of heaven. It's pretty crazy. You remember about that man of God, you know, and his helper went outside and saw the enemy surrounding Dothan. We just taught this a few weeks ago. And they had a siege around Dothan trying to get to this man of God. And this guy went back. He had the P. Willie scared out of him. So he goes back, tells the man of God. Man of God said, God, show this kid what's really happening. The kid opens his eyes. All of a sudden, he sees the hills just full of chariots of fire. A lot more than the few enemy that were against them. That's the same with you, folks. Open your eyes. Can you see it? Do you see your life that big and that important? If we don't, then we can't believe that big and that important. The hills are alive. With power. With the sound of power for you. See, God will open your eyes if you want to see the chariots of fire. If you want to see the abundance that God's given you, open your eyes, set your believing, use the keys, use your abilities, but it all hinges on what we think of Christ. You know, it's funny how the enemy, he'll just keep us in a maze. You know, keep us between the walls and just keep walking between the lines, folks. Keep between the lines. Stay here, and you got cops on both sides keeping you between those lines. You got everybody keeping you between the lines because everybody else staying between the lines, and we go through our life like that. And then there's some people who like to stand and step outside of that line. Well, to those people, he'll just expand that corridor a little bit so you feel like you have freedom. I'm not just like them that are 2 feet away from me. I'm over here. You know, I'm doing something. And then you get a little more bold and you take another step out and another step out and another step out. Well, eventually your life runs out and you still never got out of the corridor. We need to see our life bigger, and that's what he's trying to do here. It's identity theft. It's identity theft. What do you think of yourself during the day? Broke, poor, sick, or bold, prospering, and healthy? How do you see yourself? That's exactly what you're going to get. Those are the doors that are going to open up for you. It's crazy stuff. We all know this, but we just keep falling back into the world. We fall back in line. We get back in the crowd. Let's grow together. Let's move together. Let's leap over those walls. Just like that fox I've told you about before. I saw it, my neighbor had him living under her shed. I saw it hop over my 6-foot fence, run across my yard, hop into the next neighbor's yard, over that 6-foot fence. And then seconds later, I saw it hop back over that fence, and it had a squirrel in its mouth. So now it's carrying, a portion of its own body weight. Then it runs across my yard, lickety-split, up that next fence, over back in that yard, back under the shed. Yet the two vicious-sounding dogs next door, they're always hopping up, looking over the fence at anybody who walks by. And they sound fearsome. And it makes the kids want to walk on the other side of the street. Yet they've never jumped that fence. They could, but they don't think they can. Nor do they want to, because that's where the bowl is, right? That's where their bowl is. That fox doesn't have a bowl. Or maybe it does. That whole area of Colorado Springs is its bowl supply. So how big is your food supply? It's as big as eternity. See, I once saw a cow. When I worked at a meatpacking plant, I did construction work. I saw a cow that was getting led into the slaughter. They just funnel them in. They just move these gates smaller and smaller and smaller, so the crowd just gets closer and closer until only one can go through. And this one cow didn't like what it was smelling or feeling, and it literally jumped over a 6-foot fence, metal fence. And I remember I was just shocked. How does a cow jump over a 6-foot fence? Yet, the other day I was driving out toward Breckenridge, and I saw these antelope, and they can just jump over these 4-foot fence like it's nothing. It just doesn't stop them at all. Yet most of the cattle in there, they don't try. They just stand there because that's where they get their feed every day. They don't care. Antelope don't get the feed. The whole world is their bowl. It's just a different mindset. Free or tame. See, the world slaughters us if we allow it. People in the world are getting slaughtered. It's time to wake up. It's time to hop over our 6-foot fence. It's time to understand our true identity in Christ and stop identifying with what everybody told us we are. Our whole childhood, our whole life, or whatever culture you are. Who cares? God doesn't say that that's important. It's fun, and sometimes funny, but it doesn't matter. So we have full access to God. What's our limitation? See, Little Rock was beginning to realize it. He finally got it, and I think you get it. Peter was feeling good. In verse 20, he then charged to his disciples that they should tell no man that he was the Christ. Now, had he been telling people he was the Christ? Yeah, he had been. Up until this point, this is the turning point of the ministry now. No more tell people I'm the Christ. I just went to my bookkeeper, dropped off some receipts, and I know her husband quite well, and he said, she said, I gave Carrie the month of December off. I said, why would you give your best marketer, a month off? And she said, I can't handle any more business. Not this year. And so she doesn't want him to bring in any more business. That's a pretty good place to be. It's a pretty good place. She can't handle anymore. And he told, he couldn't handle, he didn't need any more attention, Jesus Christ. Couldn't handle anymore. That was it. And don't tell people who I am anymore. And basically, this was the point where this is going to end this portion of this record, and we'll get into something that'll blow your minds next week. It's such a fun. You can read it and figure it out on your own, the next few verses. But it's amazing. Look what's already been learned, and this is only teaching half of this lesson. This is only half of the lesson about the identity in Christ, the keys to heaven. Makes me want to pull out a guitar, Stairway to heaven, it's crazy. The keys to the kingdom of heaven, the power of eternity, all is tied to our identity in Christ. The miracles that you may see or may not see are all tied to your identity in Christ. And the world is all the time trying to break down that and to get you back in line. Wait till you see what happens to Peter next week. See, identity theft is and always has been a problem. But following Christ is always the answer. So this is the end of part 1, identity theft. God bless.